purpose of this presentation is to explain the Rogue Wilderness Expansion Act and why the Southern Oregon Resource Alliance thinks this is a very bad idea for Josephine County. This bill was introduced in Congress by Peter DeFazio, who actually represents our district. After you learn about this bill, if you don't like what your elected representative is doing in your name, please be sure to let him know that he's not representing you very well. A bill has to pass at both the House and Senate before it goes to the President. So after Peter DeFazio introduced the bill in the House, Senators Ron Wyden and Jeff Merkley introduced it in the Senate. So if you find you don't like it, you might want to let them know as well. What this bill does, in a nutshell, is take 64,000 acres of contiguous O&C lands in our county, plus another 13,000 acres from Curry County, and make them permanently off-limits to any timber production, mining, or recreation that requires vehicles for access. The reason this is such a concern is that our local economy is already in the tank. Ever since the Northwest Forest Plan decimated our timber industry, we've had chronically high rates of poverty and unemployment. The Secure Rural Schools funding, while it lasted, helped replace some of the timber revenues that went into the county general fund from the O&C lands, but it did nothing to replace the jobs that were lost. Now that the Secure Rural Schools funding is going away, we don't have jobs or county funding. Trees are a renewable resource. You cut them, replant them, and they grow back. But wilderness is forever. Commissioner Simon Hare told me that nothing is forever. After all, the O&C Lands Act of 1937 dedicated all of this land to permanent, sustained yield timber production for the benefit of the O&C counties, and that sure didn't last forever. But I'm aware of a lot of land that's been taken out of production and designated as wilderness, but I've never heard of a single instance of land that was designated wilderness ever being restored to production. So I have to believe that once we lose it, it's gone for good. And so is our self-sufficiency. This is a summary of the bill. Now, you've probably heard that we're talking about 60,000 acres, approximately. What we're really talking about is about 77,000 acres of O&C lands. 64,000 from Josephine County and another 13,000 from Curry County. Now, the irony of this is that these are the two counties in the state that are in the worst financial situation. When the Secure Rural Schools funding runs out, Curry County is going to be the first county to fall off the cliff into insolvency. Josephine County is second. And yet these are the two counties where they decided to take 77,000 acres of land out of production. The bill is in three parts. Section 1, which is probably the section you've heard about, is expansion of the Wild Rogue Wilderness area. It withdraws 58,100 acres of contiguous O&C lands, over 50,000 acres from Josephine County, and the other 8,000 from Curry County. Section 2 designates over 93 miles of creeks as wild and scenic rivers. Now, most of these creeks are actually within the boundaries of the wilderness expansion area, but approximately 3,000 additional acres extend beyond that area. And Section 3, additional protections for rogue tributaries, takes another almost 50 miles of creeks, all of which are outside of the proposed wilderness expansion area, and applies the same protections to those creeks as are applied in Sections 1 and 2 of this bill to the wilderness and wild and scenic rivers. When you add up all of these acres, it comes to 64,000 in Josephine County and a total of 77,000 overall. And these are not just any federal lands. These are specifically O&C land. This land has already been dedicated by Congress to permanent, sustained yield timber production, with half of the revenues going to the O&C counties. What part of permanent does Congress not understand? On this map, the area in yellow is the proposed wilderness expansion, and the area that extends beyond that within the green boundary is the area that will be withdrawn for additional protections for Rogue River tributaries in Section 3. This is almost 1/4 of all the O&C lands in Josephine County. So let's talk for a minute about why O&C lands are so important. The vast majority of land in our county is owned by the federal government. Unlike you and me, the federal government doesn't pay any taxes on their property. So that leaves the county with very little private land that can be developed or put into production to sustain our local economy. We're not the only county in that situation. Congress recognized this fact a long time ago, and in 1937, Congress dedicated a small part of the federal lands in these overburdened counties to permanent, sustained yield timber production, where the revenues would be split with the counties. The timber revenues from these lands not only provided enough revenue for county services, they provided enough jobs to sustain a viable local economy. And let's take a look at how well that worked out. During the 1970s, there was no property tax levied in Josephine County because the O&C timber revenues covered all of our basic services. Today, we're constantly battling over whether to raise taxes or cut services. It hasn't always been this way. The timber industry also directly paid more than a quarter of all the wages in this county, not even counting all the retail and service industry jobs that were sustained by the people employed in the timber industry. Every million board feet of timber harvest supports 22 jobs. In the 1970s, an average of 72 million board feet per year were harvested from the O&C lands in Josephine County alone. Since the Northwest Forest Plan, that figure has been reduced to about 5 million board feet per year in Josephine County. That's an awful lot of jobs. Now, people keep saying that we need to diversify and attract other industries, and that's fine. But we can't afford to throw away the industry that we already have while attempting to develop others. Realistically, to have a high-tech economy, you need to be situated near a university with a well-respected computer science and engineering department like they have in Seattle or Silicon Valley. We don't have that here. We need to honestly assess our assets and leverage what we've got, and what we've got is natural resources. If we throw them away or lock them up, we don't have a sustainable economy. We've been trying to diversify for 2 decades now. Let's take a look at where that's gotten us so far. After 2 decades of trying to survive without timber, this is where we are today. We have almost 15% unemployment, and that's not even counting all the people who have given up looking for jobs. Almost 20% of our county lives in poverty. Almost 30% is receiving food stamps. Over 40% of households with children in Josephine County are on public assistance. We had a 7% home foreclosure rate last year. And 127 local employers closed their doors in a 3-year period. That's almost 1 business closure per week. Pretty sobering, huh? This is a snapshot of employment in Josephine County today from the Oregon Employment Department. These are our top 5 employment sectors. It's kind of interesting that government is number 2. But what really hits you between the eyes is the fact that only 10% of our current jobs create any new wealth. The rest of them just swirl it around. And most of the money spent in retail goes to stores with headquarters somewhere else, so that's actually taking money out of our local economy. And the environmentalists are always talking about sustainability. But what about a sustainable economy? We don't have that today. Supporters of wilderness expansion claim that more wilderness will increase tourism. Well, that just doesn't make sense. They talk about the river as a tourist magnet, which is great, but what does that have to do with withdrawing 77,000 acres that can't be seen or accessed from the river? All the land that can be seen or experienced from the river is already protected today under the existing wild and scenic designation. How many people get out of their raft and scale the canyon walls to experience the other 77,000 acres that they want to withdraw from production? The fact is, withdrawing this land will have no impact on river tourism or recreation. And most of the people who use that land today for other recreational purposes will be shut off because they would need roads to get into it. If you step back and consider this logically, the only possible impact on overall tourism and recreation from shutting down access is to decrease it. The net effect will be less tourism, less recreation, and less money in our local economy. Let's take a look at the trade-offs. On the one hand, you have a very, very small minority of people who are actually physically capable of hiking more than a couple of miles into the wilderness. I can understand the appeal of wanting to get someplace remote, just far away from everybody, absolute solitude, and experience what this land was like before civilization ever even existed. I can relate to that. I can understand the appeal. But the question is, can we afford to accommodate this fantasy at the expense of our local economy? The trade-off for accommodating these people is making that land inaccessible to most of the people who use it today. Can you imagine going hunting without a vehicle? What if you shot an elk? What are you supposed to do? Carry it home? But even worse than shutting off the recreational activities is the shutting down of production and economic activity. Our county is on the brink of insolvency. Our nation is trillions of dollars in debt. Wilderness may be nice to have, but a solvent economy is critical. Shouldn't we get our nation out of debt and our economy back on track before withdrawing more land from production? In researching this presentation, I was actually surprised to learn that over a quarter of all the land in the United States belongs to the federal government. That seems like a lot. But in Josephine County, nearly 3/4 of our land belongs to the federal government. Less than 5% of all the land in the U.S. is managed as wilderness or wild and scenic. In Josephine County, 7% of our land is already designated either wilderness or wild and scenic. That's 43% more than the national average. If this bill passes, it will raise our wilderness contribution to more than 2.5 times the national average. Considering the cost of wilderness to our local economy, haven't we already contributed more than our fair share? And what's the return on that investment? When the O&C lands were managed according to the law, our county received over $12 million a year in O&C timber revenues. We had several dozen mills providing jobs and producing wealth for the local economy. Now compare that to the Kalmiopsis wilderness. Even before it burned up, it didn't bring any revenue into the county. It doesn't provide jobs, except for firefighters. It doesn't produce products or new wealth, and there aren't a whole lot of tourists who want to hike through miles of scorched earth. So considering how our investment in the Kalmiopsis turned out, can we really afford to invest in more wilderness? This is the definition of wilderness from the Wilderness Act of 1964. There are 3 key factors here. The land should be untrammeled by man, primeval in character and influence, and with the imprint of man's work substantially unnoticeable. Land that meets the criteria for wilderness is essentially pristine land that has remained untouched by civilization. The land in this wilderness expansion proposal does not meet those criteria. This is land that has been extensively harvested and replanted. This land encompasses 2 mining districts, the Mount Reuben district and the Galice district. This land contains logging and mining roads, which are also used for recreational access. Now, the wilderness supporters say that there are only a couple of miles of dead-end roads that will be decommissioned, but the term road has been redefined since the Wilderness Act of 1964. The U.S. Geological Survey defines 5 classifications of roads. Class 4 is unimproved roads, and Class 5 is roads passable only with 4-wheel drive vehicles. Most of our backcountry roads are Class 4 and 5 roads. But in 1978, in an effort to make more land eligible for wilderness, the BLM redefined the term road on federal lands to mean only roads which have been improved and maintained by mechanical means to ensure regular and continuous use. This specifically excludes all Class 4 and 5 roads, creating technically roadless areas where many roads actually exist. So when someone says there are only a couple of miles of roads out there, they're not even talking about the roads that most of us actually use to access these lands. And the real kicker is that there's buried fiber optic cable in this proposed wilderness area. Now what I want to know is this primeval fiber optic cable that was there before the advent of man? Jack Swift and I took a field trip out into the proposed wilderness area, and we brought our cameras with us, and we used a map and a compass to make sure that what we were taking pictures of was actually within the wilderness boundaries. As you can see by these photos, there are a lot of clear cuts here that are in various stages of regrowth. This is a map prepared by Len Ramp in 1979 for Dogami. It shows over 40 active mines within the boundary of this wilderness expansion area. Now, I went to the Dogami website and saw a more recent map that actually shows about 53 mines in that area. So there's an awful lot of mineral wealth under this land. And you got to remember, this land is being withdrawn not just from timber production, but from mineral production as well. These photos show a couple of roads that are within the proposed wilderness area, a mine shaft, a stamp mill in one of the areas that's being withdrawn from mineral activity. And this here is one of the many signs warning of the buried fiber optic cable in the vicinity. This is actually within the boundary of the proposed wilderness area. So you can see for yourself that this land is not wilderness. But more significantly, the BLM agrees that this land does not meet the federal criteria for wilderness. In 2007, they did a survey, and they found that only 5,667 acres in the proposed wilderness area meet the federal criteria, not the 58,100 acres this bill would designate as wilderness. Only 5,083 acres meet the federal criteria for wild and scenic designation. That's just under 16 miles of creeks, not the 93.2 miles of creeks that this bill would designate as wild and scenic rivers. And there's no legal basis at all for the withdrawal of an additional 15,300 acres in Section 3 of this bill. So you decide, which do we need more of, production or non-production? Can we really afford more wilderness? I don't think so. Thank you.